it owns non-oil revenues. If they are well collected and budget for, they can run the government without the oil money being factorized into the equations. So that's a reality. But right now, who are first and foremost being taken care of are these political leaders and the associates. So on Monday, I will visit the Electoral Commission myself again.
Yeah, but if we cannot we cannot, I don't want us to go like deal with the Electoral Commissioner. If we can get somebody who is very familiar with the electoral process over there, right? Somebody from civil society, right? And yourself, and get somebody also from probably the ISS, that'll be okay. So that we'll do a pre-discussions before the election. So just to make an assessment of what has happened in the past, right? Not necessarily dealing with the Electoral Commission because they have a lot of things that they have to deal with. We just want to.
Yes. I was. Let me just see. A fair-minded civil
correct.
society.
Fair-minded, correct. Yeah.
That is not partisans. Correct. And you remember what I was telling you about the other guy making a lot of noise in the United States. Are you hearing the news? He's been actually arrested?
No.
Oh my God, he's being arrested right now by the feds for arms smuggling.
For arms smuggling?
Yeah, I will send you the indictment.
Please.
And that is the sensitivity of these people who are calling themselves activists, claiming to be fighting on the behalf of the people. So he has some legal problem right now. We do not know. I can, according to Anglo-Americans legal system, you are presumably innocent until proven. But there is now an indictment and warrant of arrest. And I think if he has been in the custody or his family might have raised some money to bail him out. So he's in one of those situations with other companies.
Okay, you might be right, because normally I have subscribed to some of his videos, right? But for a couple of days or weeks now, I've never seen any new video on my feed, on my YouTube feed. Right?
Yes. It is because of that investigation. I think it was on Wednesday that the news broke out that the Fed want to arrest him. And I think he's been arrested. And if so, he might have just been bailed out.
Oh, okay.
He has a very good network. Knowing American system very well, I cannot say that someone is guilty until proven otherwise. So I will give him the benefit of the doubt that he's still innocent. And also, if the government does not put its legal system very well, the judge might throw it out. So it is 50-50 for his convictions and his acquittal at the same time. That's what I've been telling people. Let's be fair-minded a little bit. Yes,
let's get some people who are
fair-minded. That does not mean that he's already been convicted.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right. Dr. Nicodemus is joining us. We'll be waiting for what's his name? Eric from will be joining us from Brussels.
Okay. In Belgium.
Yeah. And Tad Coker will also join us because of the regional security aspect to bring his.
So this is what is making it really very difficult for the African activists. They are not genuine. They are most of the time partisan. They will use the activism to advance their narrow agenda rather than the collective agenda. Thing that actually can bring the public on to their cause. Yes.
All right. Dr. Dr. Mendy, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly okay.
Did I get your last name correct?
That's Minde.
Minde, okay.
Yes.
All right, so we'll be waiting for, let's give probably like a minute or two to see whether the other guest is going to join us from, he says he's in Brussels now. He will join us from Brussels. So let's see, give him a minute. Okay, he's joining it now. Dr. Eric, how do you pronounce your last name? I want to be very sure about that.
This is Ndusha Bandi.
Inusha Band. Okay.
Ndusha Bandi.
Right.
Yes.
All right. So I think we can go ahead and start since we have all three of us. Lieutenant Akoka will join us later. His area has to do with security, so we can proceed. All right. So, Jude, are you guys ready?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So, hello and welcome to this edition of the Sankofa African webinar. My name is Benjamin Akwe. I'm your rotational host for today. It's Friday, March 08, 2024, 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. Juba time, and I think it's 6 p.m. Nairobi time, and 3 p.m. GMT in Ghana, where the program is actually being hosted from. I take this opportunity to thank all our listeners and viewers on the various social media platforms. For those joining us for the first time, this panel discussion is part of our series on assessing U.S. strategic policies and relations under what you call the 3Ds: diplomacy, defense, and development towards the African continent. We have been focusing on the upcoming elections on the African continent. We started with a case of election denial in Sierra Leone. We move forward to South Africa, ANC. We look at the elections in Ghana. And last week, we look at Senegal. And today, we are taking a look at Rwanda. So today's panel discussion will focus on Paul Kagame, the man in the mirror, and the election situation in Rwanda. The discussions are a continuation of Sankofa African series on the United States government's strategy towards sub-Saharan Africa, which was announced by the Biden administration in August 2022. We've been focusing our attention on the United States government's strategic objective of openness and open society through changing constitution illegally and delivering democratic and security dividends across the African continent. So basically, this is what we'll be taking a look at. We'll also be looking at it from the perspective in terms of analyzing the election situation in Rwanda through the African Union roadmap of silencing the guns, whereby elections do not create any kind of conflict, right? We're looking at it in terms of where Paul Kagame is seeking a fourth official term of office as a result of the 2015 constitutional amendment, which gives him an additional opportunity to contest for 2 more elections. To help us delve into the election situation in Rwanda, we have brought together professionals, policymakers, academics, consultants, and experts across the diaspora and the African continent to share their perspectives on these topics to inform, educate, and present African-centered solutions and perspective to address the challenges facing the African continent. To our listeners and viewers, on the various social media platforms around the world, the Sankofa African Affairs webinar is anchored on myriad of perspectives. So there may be differences of opinions from our guests based on their expertise, knowledge, and experiences. The differences in opinions does not necessarily mean perspectives and thoughts shared are wrong, but reflect a divergence of ideas to address security challenges facing the African continent. The Sankofa African webinar relies on narratives for its discussions programs. Narratives are an integral part of African societies. In our discussion, we utilize them based on research findings, policy position, and realities prevailing in various African countries. The narratives help our panelists to present their perspective independently, and which sometimes may diverge from official government or organization policy positions. To help us do our discussion today, we are joined by Dr. Eric Ndusha Bandi. He's a professor of political science at the University of Rwanda, an associate researcher at UC Leuven, Belgium, and founder and director general of the Center for Research and Training on Human Rights and Democracy for Peace. We also have Dr. Nicodemus Minde, who is a researcher at the Institute for Security Studies. He's joining us from Nairobi, right. Thank you very much for joining us. Then we have Dr. Benjamin Mashar, who's an assistant professor of political science, University of Juba, and also a co-host of this program. Then lastly, we'll be joined by Lieutenant Akoka, who's a security sector reform consultant and a former DOD Principal Director for African Policy. But before we take our opening remarks from our panelists, we want to take a quick break so that we'll do a promotion of the organizers of the program. So can we have the promotional video? Then we'll come back and take our opening remarks. All right, thank you very much, Jude. So the organizers of the program are Bell & Associates Consulting Limited and Budget IT Ghana. Right, so welcome back to our panelists. I'm going to give you a 1 minute for you to present your welcome address, right? So let's go back to just 1 minute brief welcome address. So let's go back to Dr. Mashra. Your brief welcome address in a minute.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kwe, and the other panelists for coming today and share ideas about the upcoming elections in Rwanda, which is going to take place on July 15th, 2024. And I think this is going to be the fourth election where President Paul Kagame is going to be one of those leading candidates in that election in Rwanda. What always comes to my mind when I think about Rwanda, I have to look at the major political transitions of that country. Those transitions always influence or informs or are driven by certain individuals and certain segment of the Rwandan society. Number one, what had happened in 1959 is still dictate and inform and influence the politics of Rwanda today. Of course, we are aware of what had happened. Pogrom took place, and certain segment of society was actually displaced as a major realignment of the colonial power that had aligned with certain segment of the society, realigned and form alignments with a segment of society that was subjugated by the colonial government with certain segment. You remember during colonization, a colonial system always have to identify certain segments within the populations to side with them. In this case, during colonization, when Belgium took over after World War I, it was the Tutsis that were the favor of the colonial government until 1950s.
Dr. Mashra, we'll get into that, but we just want a brief reopening remarks. We'll get into that. All right.
Yeah, I'm setting the tone here because you cannot
understand
the current election without looking at those dichotomies.
Okay,
so, and then 1963 happens with the coming up of the independence and the military government or the government that took over, and the coup of 1973, and of course the subsequent, the claim of the Rwandans refugee in the regions, which led into 1990s and the conflict, and eventually 1994, and the post-genocide politic of Rwanda. These things are very, very important to understand why Kagame, as has been elected 3 times in 2003, 2010, and 2017. And his election have always been at the margin of 90 upwards. Okay, that is very, very important for us to understand. It is all about the transition that has taken place. It's not about democratization per se, because democratization is very different from how people are reacting using their patterns and trend in history. So I think Rwandans are very conscious about that situations, and there are so many other things that we are going to be talking about. But I think history is very important to understand why Paul Kagame is getting elections or elected in every election by landslide. Thank you.
All right. All right. Thank you very much. Let's go to Dr. Minde, your opening remarks.
So thank you once again for inviting me to this very important debate and discussions around elections in Rwanda. I also acknowledge the presence of my dear panelists. In the form of my introductory remarks, this election in Rwanda, or the politics in Rwanda at the moment, are within the confines of a very turbulent particular period of time in history, where we are seeing, the global democracy is, of course, at stake, with a lot of debates about the future of democracy. And I know, as a scholar in studying political systems and democratization, every country has its unique set of circumstances under which they do elections. It may be dependent on history, dependent on political cultures, as well as, the general democratic trends. But Rwanda finds itself in a very, interesting type of situation in which most of its, neighbors are conducting forms of elections. So for me, I'll be discussing mostly about, Rwanda vis-a-vis the East African community, and Rwanda vis-a-vis its neighbors in terms of the democratic trajectory. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Right. Let's go to Dr. Ndushe Bandi, your opening remarks.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, and I'm happy to join these prominent scholars for this very important topic. I could say I hope this talk and conversation will bring an additional light to understand the specificities of every country, but also the global context with the crisis of democratic liberal ideas and ideologies, but also really to make sure that we are producing very disruptive knowledge to know that people understand. Second, the different interpretations, hoping that we'll be open to different views, but also making a difference between norms and the values and the bias. We have everyone as scholars to be as much as objective as we can, and producing evidences and be open to different ideas. But here, importantly, from global to state, domestic, and international politics in Rwanda. But all this can't be understood without specifying what we experienced in 30 years ago. I was working on a project that, as if we are 30, all of us. I'm 30, and we are 30, all of us, as things are restarting. They're restarting from the aftermath of genocide, and our democracy we are talking about. I hope it will be just talking about democratization, not a completely house as a democracy, but democratization processes as we are talking. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for this conversation. As we are
All right, thank you very much. Lieutenant Takoka, if you are there, can you give us a brief welcome address?
Yes, I'm here, and thank you for having me, and welcome to you, Dr. Quay, and all of our panelists. It's a joy and a pleasure to be with you today. I am I come from a security background, and so that might be my flavor to the conversation. I know it's not no expertise in the academic arena or the election arena. Nevertheless, I think maybe what we will offer may have a little balance to some of the pros and cons of Rwanda holistically. And so, and also as an American, I can say that what we're doing and the program is consistent with U.S. Security, with U.S. interests in the country. And specifically, I would remind the readers that in the U.S. strategy for Sub-Saharan Africa, that we have one of the priorities include one, fostering openness and open societies, and two, delivering democratic and security dividends. So with that said, I would say we thank you again, and thank you for having me, and I look forward to the program. Over.
Right. Thank you very much. Right. So like I said, we normally use narratives. Right. So I have the first narrative, which I've sent to all of you, which is narrative on the man in the mirror, or Kagame. Right. Now, the man in the mirror is a song released by Michael Jackson in 1987. The song is about a man who believes that he can only change the world, in this case, Rwanda, by changing himself. So I've sent you parts of what the song says. And I also sent you what? An opinion piece, right, by Kagame in, I think, somewhere around 2017. Right. So I'm going to base my question on that. Right. So let me come back to you first, Dr. Mendy, right? Based on the man in the mirror, the lyrics in the man in the mirror, and based on the opinion article that Dr. Kagame wrote, Mr. Kagame wrote, I want to ask you this question. Will you agree with the lyrics in Michael Jackson's Man in the Mirror comparison to Paul Kagame and Andy Christian Agaba's opinion piece, that just like Lee Kuan Yew, who ruled Singapore for almost 31 years, despite outside opposition, Kagame's leadership and prolonged stay in power could be better for Rwanda as Lee's was to Singapore? Would you agree with that?
As I said, we cannot look at it, we cannot just give straightjacket answers to that particular question. I think it's more nuanced in terms of its approach. And of course, I'll be very brief in terms of my response. When I was reading and trying to contextualize this particular question, I came across this concept of cult personalities. And of course, history will tell us that countries or nations have these cult personalities who come to transform their societies. And of course, we have had in history cult personalities such as, Stalin, you have mentioned Lee Kuan Yew and the rest. And I foresee, and I'm currently seeing a situation in which Paul Kagame is creating some sort of a cult personality. And this cult personality, of course, if you look at history, is often tied to issues around economic development, as well as development in general. And so they look at these indicators of how much the country has been able to, to advance economically based on these cult personalities. But for me, I'm a bit worried about President Kagame's prolonged stay in power, in the sense that contextually, if you look at the history of course, the region in terms of security and how Paul Kagame came into power, I feel we need to really reflect about to what extent someone's mic is on. Thank you. So to what extent can we not just worship an individual, but trying to just idealize the principles at which he stands for? And that's what my analysis is going to be based. To what extent is Paul Kagame an ideologue as compared to these other historical personalities? And my own sincere estimation, I feel he's not yet an ideologue in terms of ideas. So to a great extent, we may not necessarily compare him to those great personalities. I know I'm going to stress this further later, but for me, I believe comparatively, of course, it's arguable. It's about debate, but in terms of ideological grounding, I don't think there is this sense of ideologue that we can, categorically say that Kagame is this type of analog and he stands for this particular idea.
Dr. Indushibandi, do you agree with Dr. Mende that we can't make that comparison between what Paul Kagame, for what he is doing in Rwanda, to what Lee Kuan Yew did for Singapore for 31 years, that has brought Singapore to where it is now?
Thank you very much. I thank you, my colleague, for this statement. And as I said from my very opening point, I was saying that I hope from this conversation that we'll make sure that we have a sufficient discussion of the situation and the processes, instead of making qualification or judgment from the beginning. So allow me maybe to respond very broadly by saying my first point is the centrality of the context and the history. Okay, it's very important to understand the political choices, and then we will understand what is the idea behind the political choices we have in this country, to be open to and to understand more. My personal trajectory, I've been working my research on, by the way, on the ideas, because Ingando and Itorero, these civic and political education programs in Rwanda, have been articulated around ideas, and this I can elaborate more and more. But when I say context and history is very important, let's fix this trajectory of Rwanda tradition. The idea can be found as well in this making choice of these homegrown initiatives and ideas, which are not even coming from him as a man, but from traditions of Rwandans. And this have been regulating not just public administration, but also all the process in terms of choosing even our justice systems, in terms of gachacha, in terms of reconciliation, unity, and the national identity ideas, and all the idea around the uniqueness of choosing the unity, the process, then, and how this idea is translated into programs and institutions. This one. Second is about all the pro-people, the people at the center of the governance, the inclusiveness which we can have from Tuesday, where we have these citizen forums, where we can see how the governance is centered around the people. This can be seen through many programs. I'm not sure that we have this very well highlighted here, but the choosing the nation building instead of waiting for the international community, the so-called international community or financial institutions to make conditions for becoming the leaders in the reconstruction process. Rwanda have made a long transition. Maybe this is something we have to examine in Africa to see how people are overcoming conflict and how transitions are designed. And these years are used for really remaking the nation, remaking ideas, and making very, very contested ideas to make choices in terms of justice, governance, and everything. Here, the idea can be seen as well in the international politics, in the very pragmatic orientation, or the idea guiding the foreign policy and the paradigm shift in the international aid for the reconstruction is around the self-reliance, which you have Kinyarwanda words to name it, which is agaciro dignity. And I published the paper on this to see how the dignity is highlighted as an idea for a paradigm teach, not just in a corporation, but also in making choices inside and to define what lines. The other idea is these state building perspectives in terms of prerequisite, you know. When they talk about ideas, maybe this once again is in Kenya, Rwanda, and this is what is particular for this country, which is making me reflecting, is to see how security or the security as a prerequisite and a national interest and the untouchable, and you can't touch on this. This is the idea of security of Rwanda is not just something which we are bringing from state building perspective from 90s, but the security of Rwanda is such priority at the point that to say you have security first and then you have nothing if you don't have it. And these have been seen. Let me look at the developmental state. We can see what is behind the developmental state here.
Okay, no, we have a narrative on development, so we'll come to that, correct?
I was responding to the idea behind the choices, what have been said by my colleague. I say the development of Rwanda is not the cut and paste models or something, but the ubudehe categories, the shift from the crop intensification program, which is very embedded in Rwanda's cultures and languages, which is helping people really to put people at the center and so on. So the man behind, I was saying how these institutions have been capable to receive those ideas and institutionalize them. And the problem here is the question of how can we sustain it, the sustainability of the institutions and the idea, but the transmission from leaders to young people in the schools. I've been in schools last week teaching some human values education. You can see something which is permanent, transmitted. And this is the pride and the proud of Rwandans in this process, which is the the people at the center. So the other issues, we can come back to this. But I was saying, we are not just having the ideas, but original ideas. We can see that it is permanent from 94, transmitted through mechanisms like Itorero Ingando, and then institutionalized somehow. So this is the first reaction, and I hope we can have time to describe now what we are saying here. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let's come to Dr. Machar, right? Since 2003, I'm going back to the man in the mirror, right? Would you say that since 2003, he, for Kagame, as the president, he has transformed over the years, and that transformation has been reflected in the Rwanda as a country? Your microphone.
Okay. All right. Are you guys hearing me right now clearly?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. Thank you, my colleagues and Dr. Akwe and Tats. It's very important to understand the process of democratization in the context of the person in the mirror, in person of Paul Kagame. Number one, when we talk of democratization, we are talking of the processes. And we are talking about democratizing the society, not the states. This is very, very important. And I'm glad that the other gentleman from Rwanda had mentioned the issue of secure threats in Rwanda. That is the state. But since 1994, there has been a movement toward democratization, a tailored democratization informed and influenced by Rwandan history, by Rwandans' geographical locations within Central African Republic, Central Africa of Great Lake regions. That's number one. Number two, when you talk of democratization, you also look at the region. In the region in which this country is situated, democratics. DRC, which is the largest country right now after the disintegration of the Sudan into two states in 2011, is not democratic enough, because the culture of democracy is still lacking, the civic attitudes. We have not moved Africa out of state nations. Most of the state countries or states here in Africa came before nations. European are nation state because it is nation that create the states. In Africa, it is the state that create nations, which is a very, very chaotic models. So democratization is the process of democratizing the attitudes and the values and the belief system so that you produce one social attitudes or social capitals. It is still lacking in most of African countries. Yes, Rwanda is attempting its best under Kagame, using developmental states to create more economics so that we have strong values. You remember in America, Americans, when you look at them during the good times, the issue of racial animosity tend to be lower. But when economic situations are worsened, the racial hostility tend to increase. So the model that I saw in the 2003 until now in Rwanda, Kagame is trying to democratize the society on economic sphere so much, okay? Because you have a big chance of the citizens of Rwanda that are opposed to the Kagame models of states formation in Rwanda after 1994, and that is a fact. And the region in which this country lies in, it is only two presidents that I can talk to about in our region of Eastern Africa and the Great Lake region that are not military. You have President Kiria in South Sudan, is a military general. You have Abe in Ethiopia, is a military guy. You have President Museveni, is a military guy. You have President Paul Kagame, is a military guy. So tell me about democratization in Rwanda. And Rwanda is such a small country whereby it cannot influence the rest of the countries because it's not big enough. And big enough does not mean that it will influence the rest, but the size of the country too matter a lot. That's number one. And number two, when it comes to regions, the region is undemocratic and it's still very and stable. Number three, when you compare it to the global realities, it is now other peoples have not yet read it, but democratization or democracy is also receding because there are also other models of governance that have emerged in China and also emerged in Korea, Singapore, the Asian tigers, because it was not democratization that brought about economic development, rather economic development that brought democratization in those places. And also be mindful, those countries that are known as Asian tigers, it was part of security rights of the national interest of the government of the United States during the Cold War. So the human rights was not talked about so much in Korea because remember it was Gerald Parks that brought about state development. And also with Lee Kuan Yew, it is one thing if Malaysia and Singapore did not separate, I don't think whether we would have democratization in Singapore because of ethnicity. Ethnic factor in Malaysia and Singapore relations led to the separation of those two regions. And then later on, that place was created as a shipyard ways for the Western goods to deter China and to tell the Chinese and the Mao or Deng Xiaoping that there is also other models. And guess what? What was the first country that Deng Xiaoping traveled to? It was Singapore to see the models. And out of that models was the reason why he said it doesn't matter whether the cat is what? The color of the cat, as long as it catches the mice. So bring it back, the Rwandan appear in the context of the global politics, especially powerful countries such as the United States. Is the US interest in Africa too powerful enough to invest in Rwanda and create it as a model to democratize the rest of the countries? And finally, I think right now, what we are seeing in Rwanda, Kagame is more likely to win. I can guarantee you by that landslide, which is what we call right now in the political science when we are studying Africa, one-party democratic states. And you can see the same thing in South Africa, Botswana, the most democratic society, Mozambique, which is still part of the liberations with Frelimo, and then Angola with MPLA, Tanzania with CCPM, and South Sudan with the SPLA. Because if the elections were to be held today in South Sudan, SPLA is still going to win because of the strong attachment of the public to it, the liberations and the figures such as Salva Kiir. So these are the dichotomy that in which we have to understand what is going on in Rwanda. To me, sometimes it's not more about Kagame. It is the appearance. The history of Rwanda is very, very important. And I'm not putting everything on the weight of history, but it cannot be ruled out. So that is the context in which I can just look at it. Kagame is
All right,
more
thank you
likely
very
to
much. Dr. Mende, you have something to say about that?
Just quickly, where he mentioned about the different experiences of democratization, and I liked his point that indeed that Rwanda is democratizing through economic development. So which one should come first? I think that should also be something for us to really debate. But I think you asked a very important question: has Kagame transformed over the years? I think that's an important question that probably when my time comes, I might also want to reflect a little bit. So I wanted just also not to I thought that point you raised was very, very important. I hope.
I don't mind. You can go ahead. Do you think he has transformed over the years, right? Well, some people make the argument that he was trying to consolidate democracy, building institutions, but in the quest to build institutions, power becomes centralized, which made him become a little bit authoritarian. Would you agree to that?
Most definitely. I don't think, and in fact, if we were to continue with that analogy, has he transformed over the years? Such transformation, if you look at different political systems world over, even for Lee Kuan Yew or any of these countries, I'll give you the example of Tanzania, where I come from, where it reached a particular period where Nyerere thought it was now important to now step aside. So that is the type of transformation that I'm talking about, which I don't think has, that point has not arrived in Rwanda yet, because we are seeing there's this some sort of monopoly of knowledge, monopoly of ideas based on one single person. I don't discount the fact that Eric says that there are different ideas, but I still foresee it is monopolization of particular ideas. And this is what is now strangulating the country, which I think would be very dangerous in the next few years. So I don't think, to answer your question straightforward, I don't think Kagame has really transformed himself to the point where he now sees himself in this trajectory of democratization. If you are to go by historical accounts, for instance, Lee Kuan Yew, and many other, historical figures.
All right, so let's go to Dr. Ndubashi. You were invited. You were shaking your head. What do you have to say to that?
You said in Dushabandi, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think once again, if you have this conversation to be very productive, it's unfortunate that we are starting with judgment.
No, Eric, I think you are every time that premise is wrong, because you are directing us towards a particular angle, which is also misleading. I think that's a strategy which maybe, if you allow me, moderator, sometimes can be very problematic.
Okay, hold on. Eric, I'm going to direct a question to you, for which you get a chance to respond to that. All right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now we're going to talk about the election situation in Rwanda. In 2017, President Kagame denied intending to run for a fourth official term after the new constitutional amendment 2015, which allowed him to evade the prevailing 2-year term limit provision and run for 2 additional terms, asserting that he is preparing Rwanda for an unspecified future leadership transition. His assertion has turned out to be false. Kagame announced his bid for a historic 4th term on September 20th, 2023, in an interview with the Pan-African Joint Africa magazine, saying, "I'm happy with the confidence that Rwandans have shown in me. I will always serve them as much as I can." My question to you is Paul Kagame holding on to power? His hold on to power, is it based on certain motivations as a way of consolidating constitutional democracy and by Rwandans having faith in him? Or he's entertaining the fear that if he leaves office, something terrible is going to happen?
Good. Allow me once again to fix my point as I'm responding to this question.
Absolutely.
One is, as we agreed, I think, with the second speaker, that we are talking about the process of democratizations. I think it is very important that we come back to my first point, as I said, as we respond, we should make sure that we understand the centrality of historical context and in what context all these constitutions are changing. Hello?
Go ahead.
Yes. There is echoes, but let me continue. The centrality of context.
Hold on.
And
Can you mute your phone? Ron, can you mute your...
Benjamin, maybe, yeah.
Go ahead.
Good. I was saying if we take it from the top, from the state and from individual like President Kagame, and we are talking about...
Hold on. Jude, can you mute Frank for us?
Frank as well, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Good. I'm saying that if we start this conversation by pointing out the top of government, as we are talking about democracy, then I was saying, let's give it a place, but let's give a chance as well to understand the processes. And when we talk about processes, it's about the development of the demos, the development of the peoples, and the context where we're talking about how actors around democracy have been evolving. And for sure, as an academia and someone who led an independent think tank for more than 7 years, I have something to share around what I've seen from 94 up to date.
Okay.
One is about really the centrality of the context and the history, where we are coming from these traditional societies. Individuals on powers are coming from societies, but also the colonial legacy, which destroyed all these common values and common institutions through which the demos have been developing and losing all the common sense of belonging to a nation. I'm talking about here, the being Rwandans altogether, or Kenyans or Tanzanians. I think this is a very important point to understand how our societies have been going for ethnicity and negative citizenship, where the public space have been hijacked by all these ideologies, at the point that we can't talk about democracy if this diversity is already embedded in diverse ideologies. Then the social contract is not there. So since 94, I was about to point out the reconstruction process and how many countries in Africa have been failing to lead this transitional period, which is a very crucial, where we reinvent a society, we reinvent a social contract, and we fix a common destiny. These have been for 9 years, I understand. And from then, what kind of decisions have been made to make sure that the peace we are talking about is not peace for elites on the top of the state, but peace for ordinary citizens? Then let the people talk about their own narratives. It's unfortunate that even academia, we can create some narratives which is totally opposite or far from the narrative of people. And where are people for me? People are in classes, people are in civil society organizations, people are in political parties, and elsewhere, pressure groups in this country. I said we are in a process. One, I saw in your audiences people from NDI. I'm the one who trained the people from political parties since 2008, for example, talking very precisely from a very important actor in politics, political parties. For Munio, who I saw in your records, was leading this NDI. I've been selected as the first trainer of political parties in 2008 in Rwanda. It was very difficult to see that really people can sit together. And this has an history. 90s have been very, 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 very bad, because political parties have been compared to ethnicity and death, by the way, up to the genocide. So creating some incisions responding to a specific context is very important to understand how the form of political parties, how people are rotating around this. Second, it's about the civil society organization. There was no civil society organization in 94 because there's not even the civil. There was no civil at this situation. Where, for example, the evidence-based perspective, research-based advocacy and so on, have been creating many safe spaces where we can see that the society is overcoming from this wounded society, where people can now go for public space and talk. Another point is about, for example, the elections and the changing constitutions. Yeah? If we take this democracy in terms of people on the top of government, then you are not understanding that democracy is not just alternance or changing people on the top, but democracy is also about the people, first of all, and the understanding that it's about accountability and results in terms of changing lives of people. Then we will say, democracy finally is about the minimum prerequisite for having this mind, going for this freedom and so on, but also changing constitutions goes with the specific context. But you have this democracy where we say touching on the constitution is not democratic. Of course, I believe in these principles. I know, but once again, I know that politics can instrumentalize the changing of the constitution in the interest of someone. But if we look at the achievement and the people where are coming from, we'll say maybe, why don't we put it on the table and say, if the changing of the constitution can bring some stability of institutions, instead of just running for a mode of 5 years changing or 7 years changing, then it becomes a problem. But the problem is saying, why the government of Rwanda or Rwanda itself have been going through these processes, but peacefully. You will say it is a militarized society, maybe. You say police, military, and so on. But we have been there to see how people are celebrating on the street, because the communication, the digital management of all this is showing that Rwanda have been having these ordinary demos, ordinary people celebrating the small achievement we are having and saying, if democracy is that, then let's look at the result and changes the society is bringing, then and we are growing. I'm not saying it is the end itself. It's a mean for maturing our democracies. If you have to keep someone for 1 year, 2 years, once again, I say, let's look at the achievement and the result as we are really working on. I'm the one. You can go in Google. I say, how can we produce the last point? The last point.
Okay, go ahead.
I said this in 2017. How can we make many Kagames, for example? This is a statement I'm having in Google. You can have it. To make them many Kagames, or saying how these big ideas and the values have been institutionalized, and making sure that the RPF on the power can make sure that we have many alternatives. But if you consider the domestic dimensions, you consider the regional threats and this global threat in terms of changing of the geoeconomics, BRICS, Western and so on, and the liberal economy and the liberal democracy, we can say, then is this now time for Kagame to step down? If this have been the focus, then we are wrong in this democratization process. I think it's the right time now to learn about these experiences. Thank you.
All right, so Dr. Mendy, I have one of our participants. I have a question for you. James, can you ask your question? James, go ahead. James has a question for Dr. Mendy. Go ahead. All right, so let me see whether I can read a question over here. Right. So hello, I have a question for Dr. Nicodemus. Is he examining Kagame's democratic credentials on the basis of Kagame's longevity in power, or from the notion of democracy as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people? If it's the latter, maybe he should be directing his criticisms to the electorate of Rwanda, who seems to disagree with his views through the periodic elections that Kagame has been winning with landslides. That's a question James is asking.
Yeah,
well, at the risk of... All right, James, please proceed.
No, that's my question, actually. And thank you, Prof, for the opportunity and for the conversation as well. And yes, I do understand the context of academics and the different notions that people interact with while examining real lives and the lived experiences and the real contexts like the context of Rwanda, as Dr. Eric was explaining. So the question for me is, just Prof has just read it out. If you look at the whole definition of democracy, originally, there was no element of saying.
I thought you had directed your question to Dr. Nicodemus Mendes. So
Yes.
make it very brief
Yes,
for
yes.
him to respond to it.
Yes. So very briefly, as I was saying, democracy, we've been told, is the rule of the people, by the people, for the people, and there was no reference to term limits or limited time frames originally. Of course, this has come up, but if you look at some of the greatest leaders the West has had, Western leaders in their history, they did not step down after 2 terms, after 3 terms, sometimes not even after 4 terms, even in recent times. And I want to believe that where we are as a continent, and as Rwanda, let me say, we are not at the same level as the Western economies where they are today. So to judge an African leader, an African president, on the basis of definitions, modern definitions of democracy prescribed by Western leaders coming from Western contexts, I think it gets lost and to lose its touch.
All right, thank you. Let's go to Dr. Mendes. Dr. Mendes, can you respond to what he's saying?
Yes, very, very briefly, and thank you so much, James, for your question. And at the risk of dominating the stage, I think there is also room for others to contribute. But when I made my opening statement, I quoted what Mohandas Gandhi, the famous Indian leader, says: it's not good for us to worship an individual. Only an idea or a principle can be worshipped. And I think that's the basis. And if you look at, and I'm glad Eric has been able to really take us through what he conceives as Rwandan ideals, which of course are very, very unique in terms of centrality of the individual, the demos, which again, if you look at the African context, this is what really defines, Ubuntu, the Ujamaa, and the centrality of the being of the person. But to answer the question is, of course, I've mentioned that quote, and of course, probably, and I made it clear, this is my own sincere estimation, that, comparatively, I don't think that Kagame is an ideologue. Ideologues in the sense of, if you look at historical leaders, of which we have currently, mentioned in terms of espousing these particular ideals, all right, and grounded on certain, beliefs that are very much ingrained in the society, in their being. And for me, based on that very fact, I believe if at all he had this particular ideals and ideologues and ideologue, every good dancer knows when to leave the stage. He has been in power for a long time. I don't discount, and the fact that you bring in this, comparisons from Western countries and the likes. And of course, I understand the transition that Rwanda has made. But for how long are we going to talk about this transition? And I want us to just also be very objective here, as Eric says, that he came into power in 2000, right? Those are now 24 years. And if everything goes as planned, it might go up to 2035. Those will be 39 years. And I think the era of those long periods, and especially now that Rwanda boasts of having set up these institutions, of which comparatively are working. And I think the transition therefore needs to be about, now the next step is who else can also come into power and continue this legacy. And of course, to be honest, I've come across very many Rwandans. There are very many bright young chaps who are visionary, who understand the history, who espouse these ideas that Kagame is also espousing as an individual and as a country. And I believe that transition is necessary. Maybe it is the unsaid things, of course, the silences in our cultural settings, probably, and we appreciate we come from different contexts, but in my own sincere estimation and based on best practices world over, I believe there are many bright, good individuals who have the capabilities to continue with the good legacy that the country has been able to really.
Yeah, but that comes back to my question, right? He is making the argument that he's trying to prepare Rwanda towards a transition. We don't know how long is it. Is it that the case, or he has feared that when he leaves office, something that he has some fear that something might happen? Because let me give you a very good example. On March 6, 2024, Liberia's lower house voted to establish a war crimes court. That was 2-3 days ago. The resolution was proposed by the president, Joseph Bakao, and supported by 42 of 72 lawmakers. The bill now moves to the Senate for a second vote later. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommended the establishment of the court in 2009, but the court was ignored. Something that should have happened years ago in Liberia didn't happen. So my question is Kagame entertaining that kind of fear that if he leaves office, right, something might happen? That is why he keeps on holding on to power. Dr.
I don't think I'm best placed to answer that. Probably Eric, who understands the context better.
Let's go to Eric. Let's go to Eric.
Good. Thank you very much. I thank you.
No, just for the records, Dr. Mende has another commitment, so he might leave us. But go ahead.
We should continue the conversation, dear Dr. Nicodemus. The first thing is to insist very much. And I wrote 3 papers on this issue, searching for the permanent idea from RPF creation up to date. I'm ready to provide in Kinyarwanda and how these have been translated in policies and now leading many institutions, and how these have been transmitted to ordinary citizens. As if you are seeing, and this has been my question, how this system have been able to think about the uniqueness of those policies from the creation of the leading party to the transitional period to address such complicated situation. And I'm ready to see what kind of political justification around all policy choices we had this country. The problem here is many of this documentation are in Kinyarwanda, which have been mainly translated, and we can find it in the street, on the street, and ordinary children is capable to capture this and to say it and what it means for Rwanda's trajectory. So the permanent idea, I stand really ready, and I think Africa, we should be ready really to say what is the permanent idea leading changes and action. Second point, so this is the ideology, as you're saying. I'm keen really to document it and show it. Second point is, I've never seen from this conversation that we are still in a transition, but we made the long transition of 9 years in this country, and this has been very much criticized, and I understand from democratic point of view. But the question here is, many countries in Africa have been failing to fix and to decide from their own sovereignty to say, you are saying, you know, this state building process is saying, okay, as we are ending the conflict now, please bring back your enemies, please do the integration, please go for election, please go for this. And this is the condition for the aid, international aid for these financial institutions. So the Rwandan trajectory for 9 years of transition, it's a very important box to open. As I said, to understand why Rwanda, how they have been capable to say no to this international community, who have been saying, okay, if the streets were full of dead bodies of genocide, you know, but the people was pushing, let's bring constitution back, let's bring elections and so on. So the uniqueness of Africa is really to go for this democratization processes without fixing any prerequisite, you know, because you are very dependent. And this is a self-reliance philosophy, the Agachiro philosophy, which is a dignity Agachiro, which have been the barrier. And the idea can be found it not just from this transitional management, but also for even aid paradigm change, you know. And you can see it now for ordinary citizens. When a Rwandan said Agachiro, my dear, you stop talking. It is a very strong idea, which you can find it. Then let me go for this period now. What people have been doing, yes, changing constitutions is a problem. Constitution is a willing of people. It's a mother of all laws. We believe on these principles. But at the same time, when you see that people are saying, okay, we have even internal many realization. Domestic policies are really changing lives with these social protection policies, very inclusive economy, very inclusive governance system, very participatory. I said from Tuesday, I have been participating in a citizen forums, how this has been open. Second, I have been reporting myself as a director of an independent think tank that 80% of people are not happy for this and this, for example, you know? And this from very smart and very constructive engagement, I produce policy dialogue, which is totally different from activism. I respect so much this kind of practice. But when activism is tagging just a president, then you miss a chance to understand the whole processes inside and how the society is maturing. Last but not least, is now how do we keep this sustainable and owned by all people? Then the capacity of leading political party to have many Kagames, as I'm saying. Yeah. So if the target becomes the Kagame itself, we not understand what we are going on through. But once again, I believe we could have many Kagames, not just in Rwanda, but in Africa. Thank you.
All right, let's go to Dr. Machel. What is your take on that? We've had situations where we have constitutional changes, but in the end, it has brought about chaos and conflict in some of African countries.
Well, thank you, Dr. Akwe and my colleagues. You know, we have to go back always to history and sociology of that given society.
Exactly.
And for changes or transition to happen, you have to see the major shifts from 1994 or from post-independent. You know, the processes, the political development, socio-economics of Rwanda have always been in the trajectory of post-colonial, post-Rwanda genocide, post-Abiyaramana, post-Kayabana. You know, now we have to be very, very careful. Kagame is a product of political history of Rwanda. You cannot touch him. He's a reflection of Rwandan society. Okay, that's number one.
User, can you mute the guy with the user? Can you mute yourself? Or Jude, can you mute user? Okay, go ahead, Dr. Masha.
So I have to put it that he's a product of the Rwandan society, historical changes and development and transition. It would be wrong for anyone to deny that changes have not happened in Rwanda. No, changes have happened since post-Rwanda 1990s until now, especially in the area of economic development. We are very, very proud as Africans for what we are seeing in Rwanda in terms of civic engagement, in terms of economic development, in terms of economics, reduction of economic inequality, the development of digitals or digitizations, and the fueling or the initiative of people taking dignity first. The idea of being clean as Rwanda is very, very important because I was transitioning in the airport at one time, and we were warned in the plane that don't throw a bottle of water somewhere in Rwanda. That is a sign of civic engagement informed by people's social attitude and attributions. So no one can deny those. But to say that there is no transition going on in Rwanda also is not true because Rwanda is still in the mode of transitions. I understand there are still a lot of peoples from Rwanda who left in 1994 is still in DRC and they would want to come back. So that is still a transition that is informed by Rwandan history. So And I think the real transitions in Rwanda, which in the French Franco-Africa, they always talk of first republics, second republics. Like in America, there was Jeffersonian democracy, Jeffersonian era, Jacksonian and Republican era, and then it came to 1990s, 1920s, until 1940s. So those were different eras. So those things, if we start with 1994, it's still an era. It has not yet stopped. It will stop later on when Kagame leaves the stage, okay? And he will leave the stage on the willingness of the Rwandan peoples, not the willingness of outsiders. That's number one, and it's very, very important for us to understand as African scholars. And second point, is he won or is staying in power because the people won? It is actually the latter, not the former. If it were because of him staying in power, going through the civil war and reconstructions in post-genocide 1994, these are very traumatizing. And the man is very tight, but his people are telling him that the era has not yet come. And as my brother from Tanzania says, he's a smart guy. He knows when the music actually hits. At some point, it's more likely to leave. But the experience of Rwanda is very important. It's not like the experience of Kenya, because in Kenya, there is a really transition that is taking place. Because from 1990s until now, you have been having opponents, even if they join together to be in one party and part ways because of the political differences and the persecution, the outcome always is very respected. So let's be honest with history of Rwanda and the transitions and the change in social attitude. A lot of attitude have also changed and shifted, but some have not yet, because in a political environment whereby you cannot be allowed to say certain words too, that is not democratic enough. But you can say by whose standards, by whose definitions. Okay. Again, the context of the given society is very important to be reflected.
All right, thank you very much. Let me come to Dr. Mendes. Since you have very limited time, I would like you to respond. But before that, I want us to go to the congressional narrative on Rwanda participation in regional security, right? So you can add both. So I sent to you the narrative. But this is what I have. During the recently ended African Union Summit in Addis Ababa, there were open hostility between Rwanda Kagame and DRC Tshisekedi, who sat, they both sat at the same table, right? Reports by African Reports reveals that instead of the two men discussing solutions, they were seen trading insults at each other. The African Union Commission, in a quest to resolve the differences, referred the open hostility between the two men and the M23 conflict to the PSC. Angola President Lourenço hosted a mini summit between the two men in a bid to revive peace efforts for the violence wrecked, among other things. The return to constructive reconciliating dialogue between the two countries, the immediate cessation of hostilities, the immediate withdrawal of the M23 from the occupied areas after 10 stalks and flash protests by demonstrators at the AU. Is Rwanda becoming a destabilizing actor to its neighbors, Uganda, Burundi, and DRC, on regional security, or is it acting in its own national security interest?
Well, that's a very good question. And there's this book I really like called Why Comrades Go to War. Yes, it's an excellent book that gives you that historical account to just understand, where Rwanda is or how the, comrades eventually fell out. And it just gives a very excellent, historical analysis of the Second Congo War and all that. And I believe if you were to really place our, if you were to historicize all this, we can really understand the security dynamics of Rwanda. And back to my colleague, Dr. Eric, who said that security for them is the most important thing, in the sense that it now protects or preserves, the state as it is. Of course, it is not unique to Rwanda and many other things, but not to the extent. And this is what now I want to really now break down. Just like freedom, security should not also be your security should not be at the expense of trying to destabilize other states. And by all accounts, we have to state these facts as they are, that post 1994, we have seen on various United Nations reports, big powers like the United States have often accused Rwanda for being a destabilizing actor in the region, which again points to what we are really facing now with the M23, Red Tabara in Burundi, and many other things. And of course, you can recall in 2013, there was even a major fallout between President Kagame and Tanzania's President Kikwete over these security situations. And of course, to be honest, I always want to understand the historical, this history and appreciate histories of countries. But we should not also be at the same time be slaves to these particular histories. That we also learn from these histories and then we proceed towards, present theorizing of our history. So to a great extent, the question is that you've asked, yes, we're experiencing now is a lot of instability. We saw with the East African Regional Force, which again failed terribly because of many other factors, but chiefly it was personal differences and of course a lot of political rhetoric. And now we are seeing also a lot of frustrations to the SADC mission from Kigali. A lot of frustrations trying to throw shades and mud to this particular mission. Again, it just points you to what's the role of the state of Rwanda now in actually stabilizing this. And for me, I see this is just another prolonged nature of these transitions that my colleagues have been talking about, which I think we now need to really.
Dr. Mende, okay, all right, so let's hear your thoughts on that, Dr. Eric. Let's hear your thoughts on that. Is it becoming a destabilizing actor in the region, or is it just acting its own national security interest?
Thank you very much. This is it should be a very separate conversation, really. Because when we take it from this question, it could be shortcomings. This is my own story, dear Dr. Mende and the colleagues. I'm born in this Eastern Congo. So I know the story. It's not something I read in a book. I'm not reporting anyone's history, So taking it from this question is good, but it will open us to the history of the failure of the region to deal with regional security. And this is not coming from Mobutu or Habyarimana or someone else. It's even far from there. With this region, which I grew up in as a part of traditional Rwanda. We have been talking Kinyarwanda in this Eastern Congo. This is 1885 Berlin Conference as a result of the process. This is not something I read. I grew up in this context where my grandfather told me that I've never came from Rwanda. I was in this region. So then, when 90s, with the crisis of Mobutu and Habyarimana and everyone in the region, where the ethnicity took over the identities on the street, then the Banyarwanda, the Kinyarwanda speaking people have been chased from this region to go in Rwanda. I'm speaking from Brussels now, but I'm part of this society of Rwanda and the Eastern Congo. The point is, when we saw this ideology coming in this region of ours, we saw how things changed and the context of a failed state. I'm sorry to say it, a failed state here, I'm saying a state which is not capable yet to ensure security for everyone in this Eastern Congo and offering the basic needs response to ordinary citizens. With this context, all ideologies are good. Everyone can take it and use it up to Kinshasa now. We saw people, we grow up with them. Since we have been in Kinshasa, the ideology coming from Rwanda was devastating. And this is not an ordinary history, my dear. It's a history of a genocide ideology, which kept it from Rwanda to Eastern Congo. The extermination of Tutsi, wherever he is, it has been developed under my work when I was writing about identities in the Great Lakes region. I was teaching at Université de Goma recently, 2014, 16. What is in our books, our students in Goma are reading, is this Hamitic and Nilotic stories, Bantu opposition. And this ideology can be seen today. So starting from very far, you come now in 94, when the international community failed to separate genocidaires and other citizens. And Congo or Zaire have never come up from this weakness of controlling its territory and boundaries. It means the problem will remain. Then Rwanda can instrumentalize it. Rwanda can use it for its own interest. This is a separate debate. But there is something which have been failed, a failing system which have never been capable to push far these enemies as defined by Rwanda. So the idea of national security as a prerequisite for everything, for this, by the way, a small country geographically, you keep enemies at the border, it will not work. So I'm not justifying at all War 1, War 2, War 3, War 4. I don't care about this. But my problem is, if you are putting on the table the idea of dialogue of these Rwandaphone speakers in Eastern Congo, and make sure that M23 is not a group of bandits or just people on the street. This is a concrete history of families. They are in Uganda, they are in Rwanda. It's about thousands and thousands of people who are claiming the right to be in Eastern Congo as a region. But Congo has many problems that this can't be understood and kept as very urgent, you know. So,
all right, okay.
This is a context. So the security of Rwanda, of course, is very key for everyone in this very realistic context of powers and security. But as well, our argument around this should put on the table the clarity of things that Rwanda is geographically situated. It will not. We can refuse it, we can accept it. Rwanda is still, Congo is not strong enough to say we control the territory and we control ideologies or external rebel groups are going out of Rwanda. It will remain a problem. But once again, the dialogue, acceptance of these people in the Eastern Congo will be one of the solutions, maybe to see now the behavior of Rwanda if this is resolved.
All right. So let me come back to you, Dr. Machar, right? You saw, I don't know whether you watched the AU summit. You saw the open hostilities between the two leaders, right? Now, we know that African countries are fragile. We know Congo is fragile. And given what Rwanda is doing in terms of supporting the M23, isn't that promoting regional insecurity?
I was actually in Ethiopia last week, and I was able to talk with some friends at Addis Ababa University on these issues of Africans' unity, economic developments, regional integrations. But one of the things that kept coming up is hostilities among these neighboring countries, North and the South in the Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, Somalia, Ethiopia, and then you come to South Sudan with almost its neighbors because the metric of the states have not yet been established. The borders lines between South Sudan and Uganda, the Uganda is encroaching in, and then Kenya on the other side is also encroaching in. The only country that has not actually encroached into the border of the Republic of South Sudan is DRC. And it's not because DRC does not want to encroach in. It is because of instability that has actually marked the political development and history of that country since 1960 at independence. So it has never had a really functioning government that can actually prioritize the affairs of the states, the way Tanzanians have been doing it. So that's number one. So the issue of national interests are very important here, centered on national security of each country. And depending on the state matrix of each country, take for example, the state matrix in Rwanda are more comparably strong compared to what we see in the DRC. That's number one. And then the security interests on two grounds. We still have a lot of Rwanda nationals who fled genocide in 1994 are still opposed to Kigali. So it forced the security interest to Kigali. Second point, we have the Rwandans people that go back even to before 1885. You go a little bit more to 1860s, where these issues emerged. And there were people who speak Rwanda in the regions. And then you have the reality of colonization that always choose and divide. And then you have post-colonial African politics, whereby Mobutu took over. And when he realized in 1970s that things are going very bad, he has to identify someone to blame, okay? Someone to blame. This is very, very important. And we are aware of what had happened. So Rwanda and DRC Congo are very antagonistic of each other. Chekedi, of course, is also playing African card here because he's the son of Antoine Chekedi, the guy who was very much opposed to Mobutu and Lumumba in supporter. So his names are like the Kenyatta boy, okay? This is very, very important. And like Kagame, who has actually consolidated power and trying to project the national interest of Rwanda as a result of those two things, 1994 and those who had fled, committed genocide and fled to Eastern Congo, and then the historical communities of Rwanda, diaspora in that region. They have not yet been integrated the way that Bahima and Bairu in Uganda have been integrated. This is also very important. So the Congolese have lessons to learn and also trying to address before blaming the Rwandans for interfering in the internal affairs in two ways. Put your act together, put your house together, create more state in the Congo, and then trying to address the issue of national citizenships, okay? Which has have your national who are born in your territory, and you still call them Rwandans, which means you are inviting Rwandan into your national affairs. And then you have the issue of economic development. That region is endowed with a lot of natural resources, including the fertile farmland. You remember those boys like Laon Munda. They are from that, okay? And in the late 2000s, he started that rebellions in Eastern Congo, and it is because of that citizenship, which has not been addressed by the Belgium, the post-colonial government, and the successive government of Democratic Republic of Congo. So there are so many things that have to be entangled. National interest is there. There are things that invite Rwanda into Congo that are not Rwanda making.
All right, thank you very much. Let's go to Dr. Mende. Do you have anything to say about that from what you've heard so far?
Yes, I do. And I appreciate, of course, Eric, you raised those very important questions around ethnicity, identity, nationhood, which continue to be a problem in that particular part of the world. And they have not been able to be addressed. But I also think it will be unfair. Of course, this is the international labeling that Congo has oftentimes been accused of being a failed state. But to what extent is this labeling as a result of the West itself or its neighbors in terms of making Congo a failed state? It's very easy for us to say, go ahead and make your house an order. Congo is this vast. The same way we appreciate, we want us to appreciate Rwanda's history, the same way we want to really also appreciate Congolese history, which is also a turbulent history. We also need to be a little bit fair on the Congolese state because of its vastness, because of its history of colonialism, post-colonialism, and all those forms, interventions, histories of the Congo wars and all that. And to what extent this instability is also is a result of, states. And I agree that the same way we are talking about this transition, Congo has gone through this. And I might not be a resident of Eastern DRC, but I could be able to really sympathize with the plight of these people These are also, like my friend Benjamin is talking about, these when you're talking about African unity, these are our people as well who are suffering the brunt of conflict, violence, the same way, the same magnitude of which Rwanda maybe faced previously. So we need also to really understand that particular part of their history. And when you read, I'm going to base my my analysis based on secondary literature, of course. People have done research and make observations. If you look at the success of how they ousted Mobutu in 1997, and there was a period in time, and it was actually, Professor Benjamin, you'll admit, this was a Pan-African initiative, right, of post-colonial liberation, of which, to a great extent, succeeded with the ousting of Mobutu in 1987. In came, of course, in 1998, when now Congo wanted to put its house in order. And we know it is very difficult to say this, but these people who helped Mzee Joseph Desir Kabila, who are from the larger part of the region, largely are also drawn from Rwanda, Kaberebe and the like, when they were told, now it's time, let us now rebuild our country. We know what transpired later. Years later, Mzee is dead. And this, we can't wipe this particular part of Congolese history, in as much as we also want to really appreciate this other part. We do. And we also need to understand the context at which the death of Mzee realized the Congo as we know it today. Is it Western powers? Is it regional powers, which we may not want to name? Is it, how comrades fell out after the war? Your guess is as good as mine. So with that particular appreciation of that particular history, we therefore need to put context. And then it would be very unfair to start saying and labeling Congo is a failed state. Very nice narrative, right? The same way Somalia was labeled as this failed state, for a long time. We need also to really reflect on that. And I do understand, and this is now my challenge, how do we integrate the same way Rwanda has been able to integrate Rwandan-speaking people of Uganda is the same way, and there are ways in which we can do that is other than destabilization missions and causing insecurity. These are the conversations that need to be put on the table on how we can be able to integrate these particular people into, and of course, there's that always, which I think it's also defeatist, the element of genocidal ideology. I don't discount it. But how can we be able to really come and discuss these pertinent issues of ethnicity, of which, Eric, you bring out very clearly in your discussion? And that way, we can be able to build sustainable peace as opposed to just this labeling of, which can be very defeatist. I beg to end my argument there.
Let me come in here, Ben.
Hold on. Let's go to Lieutenant Adkoka, right? Then we'll come back to you. Lieutenant Adkoka, right? You on various discussion panels have raised the issue of African countries dealing with their own internal security, right? And the hostilities was between Rwanda and what? Uganda, and DRC Congo. The problem is that DRC Congo has not been able to deal with its own internal security. And this is what is forcing Kagame to address these people in Eastern part, right? So would you say that Kagame is becoming a destabilizing actor, or it is just acting its own national interest, national security interest? Listen to our panelists and their submissions.
Thank you for the opportunity to make a small contribution. I don't, well, there are a lot of things, the entire region, I would say everyone would agree that is destabilized. And so there is just clearly the problems in DRC. There are also challenges in Rwanda and challenges in Uganda. We talk about Kagame holding onto power, and then you would look over to the neighbor, and I would say the same may apply in Uganda if the seat of power there isn't transferred kind of from generation to generation. On Kagame and on Rwanda and on security, I would add that I would just offer some other points. I would address Benjamin Machar and his drawing our attention to Rwanda and others as state nations and not yet nation states. And I would tell you that kind of keep a close eye on that. And part of the conversation as it talks about the Kagame's longevity. And with I think it's Dushin Bandi previously talking about the idea in my kind of outsider looking inside view of the idea for many heads of states, African heads of states, is from this state nation context rather than the nation state, and also not from a true democracy. And so the democracy and the demos, it's evolving. And as one of the other speakers says, yeah, that we are, from the 94 and prior, just kind of now kind of coming to our own traditions and allowing them to evolve as when they were stomped over, if you will, by colonial and other international pressures. And so I recognize, and many do, that things are evolving. That said, there are like it or not, the idea Kagame holds in his head, as does others, and also in the African tradition, is that why not? Yeah, we talk about democracy; it's not there yet, and we know about chiefs and the longevity. Many of them, as I have read over the years, believe they're in power for life. And so, like it or not, that's what we are faced with. If you look over, and they draw examples from where, externally from Russia and from China, and they see in North Korea, and they see people in power, and they say, why not me? And also, some of those other countries can talk about make claims to democracy, but but for many it is, well, okay, no, I'm democratically elected, and then again, there's the issue of if they're really kind of to what extent the elections are legitimate. I would also ask the audience and also and the panel to say, okay, look at it again. I have said before that yeah, okay, and with the idea and with the societies they have this, and if it's a state nation, then the polity and the demos is at the state level. And so what you don't see, and what I have not seen in many African countries, is really an active polity, a demos at the local level. And so, democracy building down and up. You see democracy installed at the state, and then, but not down below. And so, but that's it's a crawl, walk, and run process, and it is not certainly not mature. I think and I believe it was another that did kind of pay proper attention to the economic development of Rwanda. I would add there too, from the security point of view, is that when the world recognized what was going on in '94, and that they missed and they failed to take notice and to get involved, uh, that sunk deep back in the U.S. government, and particularly, as you might recall, with the former President Bill Clinton. And so from that point, from '94 and the genocide, the U.S. government took notice in Rwanda and did its level best to assist. and specifically in the security front, and it signed Rwanda up as what one of its partners in our program called GPOI, Global Peace Opportunities Initiative, and so that's where with and that's in response to the U.S. government kind of listening to a demand signal from the continent, from the head of the states leaders on the continent, saying that we are talking about and Mashar mentioned this. Benjamin mentioned this recently. His last talk last week, about the conversation at the AU, hostilities among neighbors. And so back in the in the mid to late 90s, there was the hostility. Back then there was the hostility among neighbors, and that's why where they were asking for help in developing this peacekeeping capacity building. And so at that moment, Rwanda did become, in fact, a principal key security partner for the U.S. It remains a key security partner for the U.S. and our command that we refer to as Africa Command, and it is to Kagame and the Rwandans' credits, they did kind of put their hand up to say we want to contribute to do something about this. And with that respect, we did the U.S. government partnered with Kagame and the Rwandans. Last point, and that is, in addition to the GPOI Global Peace Operations Initiative that is still running, there was in the 2015 timeframe with the Obama African Leaders Summit, they asked to get the leaders themselves, African leaders, kind of asked for help. And so we initiated another program, and that program was called the African Rapid Response Peacekeeping Initiative, which Rwanda played a key role in. And so that all to say, in response to your question of Kagame and the concerns there, and also that region, Rwanda and Uganda and the DRC and the like, it's evolving, and so these are maybe some of the pains of the evolution. The commentators that talked about the idea do need to kind of keep on working on that, building it again, and get that to take root, because that is the U.S. A couple of hundred years ago, ours was the U.S. Constitution, and also not only that, but more so the Declaration of Independence was our big idea. And so that has kind of been used in civics and history lessons and so on and so forth. I get that to plug with the Board of Academics here. You can never ever underscore the imperative of education, very rich, robust education systems, and move on from there. And I hope that kind of helps in the conversation. Over.
All right, thank you. But time is fast spent, so let's come back to you, right? In trying to run up your submission or perspectives, right? Let's start with you, right? And Dr. Mashar, you have something to say, but you can say that and try to wrap up the way forward for Rwanda and the region as a whole.
Well, our arguments or our conversation is also trying to understand whether Rwanda has transitions in the context of the U.S. foreign policy in Washington, and how it is actually sometimes pursuing its interests in the regions, like in other countries. What I can say in relation to DRC Congo, in historical context, in its post-colonial time from 1960 to 1965, 1965 until Mobutu was taken out in 1997, the missed opportunity there for DRC Congo, because in that historical context, DRC during the Cold War was the darling of the United States. And it did not use that opportunity to rearrange, to refigure, to construct the states. So, and that has created a weak state in that part of Africa. And it's a fact, because Congo is not as functioning as Rwanda. Number two, Rwanda, despite its accusations of being a destabilizing force in the region, has used the failure of international community in 1994 to try to reconfigure and create a new Rwandan appearance, whereby it resolves some of its domestic problems and also pursuing its national interest in the regions. And in this case, in eastern part of Democratic Republic of the Congo. And of course, we are aware of the fact that my brother from Tanzania was right. That was a Pan-African operation that took out Mobutu, of which, you know, the Congolese played their part, the Rwandan, Ugandan, but mostly Angola. Remember the operation that Mobutu was supporting of those of Roberto when the government was going to Rwanda in 1975. And that part was defeated. And the Angolans, especially the MPLA boy, had never forgiven the Congolese on that. And when it comes to the 90s, at the point of taking out Mobutu, the Angolans were very instrumental. So that is the reality. We are not going to be bounded by history, but we cannot actually run away from our history. So the way going forward, I think the really transitions in Rwanda in respect to Kagame will take over during the next generation what Kagame is not there. Okay? It's like when Tanzania and Tanganyika and Zanzibar were united. You know, Nyerere prepared the way and he gave leadership later on to others. So that the interest of the other parties, especially Zanzibar, were incorporated. Now, it would be very difficult for a Zanzibar to argue that the mainland Tanzanians are dominating us. No, that argument would not resonate right now. They would rather blame the weakness within the CCCMs because it is the party that brings the person, not the mainland. And that stage has not yet come when it comes to Rwanda. Let's be honest, because Kagame is a part of Rwandan historical processes. And when he leaves power later on and another person comes, okay, this is where we actually talk of real democratization of the Rwandan society. And the security interests of the Rwandan state will never change because you never democratize the state, you democratize the attitude and values of the people. Thank you so very much.
Right, thank you. Let's go to Dr. Mendy. Right, what is the way forward?
Thank you very much. Mashar has just stolen the words from my mouth. So one of the things that I advocate is the maturity of the demos. Once a demos matures, and that's why there was a question in the audience that what if, you know, the people have decided that we still want to manage Kagame. For instance, in 1992, I'll give you an example from my country in Tanzania. There was a presidential commission about the probability of Tanzania transitioning to a multi-party democracy. 80% of the people said they still wanted a single party rule. But it was Nyerere and his wisdom. He said the 20% can still be also important, right? So this is the maturity I'm talking about, of which I believe, to be honest, if you I very nice, warm, very good people in terms of, and they understand this particular history. And for me, I also see them playing a key role as they continue to mature in terms of this democratization process. All right, we have spoken at length about top leadership, but I believe also in my concluding remarks that the Rwandan people also are in the process of democratizing. Right? And I know with time, they will see these things as they are. And probably it will also reach a time when also Kagame will also say, yes, you people have a lot of trust in me. But I think it is time for us to make this particular transition. Rwanda has produced great statesmen who are working in international organizations. Someone was saying it has contributed to norm setting in peacekeeping and all those things. So it has all these potentials. So I believe these things put together, it can lead to this particular transition. And of course, economic prosperity, unity, success of Rwanda as a country, which will also, to a great extent, also contribute to democratization within the region where we come from, maybe to send shock waves to Uganda, to South Sudan, and all that. And that's how democracy happens.
Right. Thank you very much. Let's go to Dr. Indushbandi. What is the way forward in terms of the transition, in terms of regional security? What is the way forward?
Thank you very much. And really, I enjoyed this conversation. And I hope we keep the conversation going on.
Yeah.
Let me just say, as we are going in this trajectory of the so-called liberation processes in Africa, as soon as we liberated, how do we make sure that countries are strong enough to possess now what they liberated? Yeah, and this is the main challenge. After possessing a nation, the liberated one, is now how do we engage in healing the wounds we experienced, healing our nations? I think academia and the practitioners, we should think once again how, after all this, we are not going for bargaining and responding to imperatives of international demand, external demand, at the price, at the cost of sacrificing domestic interest or people's interests, because we are having to respond to many demands from this very interdependent world and a very changing world in this process. So the healing part of our nations, considering the context and the history of peoples, and then being the product of our socialization processes. It's very important. Then the last one is to rebuild now, to rebuild based on these healed societies. And this will require us to be innovative and creative for not existent solutions, not the easiest solutions, even those solutions which would bring our circles of powers after liberation to be divided. And we have been experiencing it in this country of Rwanda. Then my second point is, maybe for this healing process, I said, the mistake maybe which Rwanda could make is to take long in this healing or of these wounds at this point. But we can't condemn very quickly. Olivier Gatete, can you close your mic, please? Gatete. I was saying that maybe the long healing process of this Rwanda, I'm taking this maturing, we can be impatient. We can say it is over now. 30 years is many years already. But we could say, yes, it is taking so long transition. It is taking so much time to say Kagame is still needed for this. But we don't consider maybe as well how the world is changing very much and how the threat in the region, as we are now living in this process, Africa should make choices, very difficult choices in this geopolitical arena, in this ecological, energetic transition. As we are talking about Eastern Congo, we must, and the US interest or US orientation is to consider all this BRICS development now, where Africa are not yet ready to make choices and have a common voice. So the statocentrism here, the actors on power, will be made really to go in this realistic perspective, to say, I maintain the security as my priority as I'm going for this interest in the region. Again, stability, security as a prerequisite, minimum reconstruction of the state as minimum really prerequisite, but also responding to the need of the city in the public sphere. We should send citizens in a public sphere. If we are still failing to do this equilibrium of ethnicities and the quotas and so on, I have been in one of the region, Tanzania, but also even in Kenya. I recognize that the multinational or multi-ethnic societies are very crucial. But as we are defining the power sharing based on these ethnicities, be vigilant that this ethnicity will be used, instrumentalized by people in power. Then in the city, we don't have demos, we don't have Democrats. We have these people who are not empowered, weak education, very dependent system, then they are very poor. So make sure that you are going for elections. I was reading, by the way, a paper this week. How can we find very contradictory concept? Democracy without elections. If you are not yet ready for elections, if you don't have yet ready citizens in the city and general interest. This is my last point. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We've had a very interesting conversation, right? So I just want your brief 45 seconds closing remarks for us to come to the end of this program. So let's go to you first, Dr. Mashar, right? 45 to 1 minute closing remarks, then we'll go to the rest. Bye.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Kwe, and I'm very happy to be in conversations with my other African colleagues on these important matters. As you are aware, I've lived in America for the last 20 years, and I've actually interacted with a lot of Rwandans, Burundians, Congolese, Kenyans, Ugandans, and these issues are the things that we have been discussing in our respective PhD trainings back at Howard University. And I benefit greatly from the experience of my African colleagues and scholars on this important issue in the Great Lake region. Yes, after we have waged the war, what do we do after we have actually succeeded? That is an elephant question in the rooms, and it can be reflected back to us as South Sudanese. We are now asking ourselves, the leaders of SPLA during the war, if they emerge today, those bodies, if they emerge today and see themselves with their current status, they will start fighting with each other because they have become whatever they were opposing with Khartoum. So the politics of South Sudan today is a Khartoumization of our polity without Khartoum, using South Sudanese. So this is the problem that had happened, the transition that has taken place in the DRC, because the government of President Kabila become Mobutu without Mobutu, and the secessions continue. So that's why we can say, democratization is not by election. No, it is actually the social attitudinal changes that are very important. And as we always use to argue, you are aware of this. American, according to me, did not become democratic society until 1960s, when a segment of the American society, which is the Black population, was incorporated into democratic or democratization processes. And consolidation of the American democracy came exactly with the election of President Obama. This was the major shift. Those stages have not yet happened in Africa. Why? We are still in the state formation. State formation in Africa. And because African societies have not created the states. The state created nation states, which are still called state nation. Belgium in Western Europe is a state nation, it's not a nation state, okay? So these experiences, we are not the problem. The question is, how do we actually benefit from the Rwandan model? The success of RPFs and Kagame and his other colleagues is the fact that they have learned from the history of Rwanda. Yet still there are mistakes, but they have actually learned that they want to actually shift from where they were coming from to a new direction. Yes, we are debating the shortcoming of the new direction, but we are not refuting the fact that there are changes. As I was mentioning to you, I was in Ethiopia for a week at Addis Ababa University. And I went to Ethiopia in 1988 when I was part of the liberation in the Sudan, part of the Red Army, which became the Lost Boy of the Sudan. And when I was in Addis, I went outside the country. I saw the changes that had happened from 1970s. With Mengistu, the land remained nationalized. It has never been a crown land as it used to be before. That's number one. That has created accessibility of economic resources to the people. And the TPLF government maintained that. They did not actually alter what Mengistu did. And they add incremental in terms of development. And you can see right now, if you go outside Addis Ababa, the height of the Ethiopian population that I saw in the late 1980s has totally significantly changed because of nutrition intake and improvement in terms of access to resource and economic development. Ethiopians are fairly right now more taller compared to before. That is economic development, which is very important. Yet in terms of political changes, there is still a lot of hiccup, but I think Africa will also accept the dynamic and global changes. So Rwanda is changing. And
Right.
the period of consolidation has not yet been arrived. It is not yet Uhuru. Remember, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga with his famous statement, until African countries are not only politically independent, but economic independent. We are not yet economically independent, but transition in Rwanda is not at the point of consolidation, but in the point of processes. We are building on it incrementally. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. Let's go to Dr. Eric. What's your closing remarks, briefly? Unmute your microphone. Your microphone is mute.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I said, let's be conscious.
Yeah.
Let's be conscious that we are going for this very changing world as it have never been. This ecological, environmental, and energetical transition, I'm not sure that this will bring us to sustain and to consolidate. We have what people have been constructing since then. Let Africa be consulted. Second, the voice of Africa will be the very divided than it have never been. What I'm seeing in these regional blocks, which would be bringing a solution, now the regional blocks are being used for serving interests of some people around this. So the voice of Africa in this trajectory, this has to be really put on the table as academia and the practitioners to rethink this diplomacy or these foreign policies based on the conditionality of democracy.
All right.
Last note point is really for this very pragmatic diplomacy. To have the capacity of our state, our government, to make choices and alliances basing on internal demands, internal priorities. We have been failing on this part of it, and this is the self-reliance perspective. Last but not least, let's next time have this conversation and how do we document all those principles and ideas my friend Mendy highlighted, how this is serving now this lesson we are taking from this conversation. Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you. Let's go to Lieutenant Koka. Then we have Dr. Mendy having the last word. Lieutenant Koka, what your closing remarks?
Thank you. I would have to echo what my colleagues have mentioned in terms of the state capacity, social attitudinal changes. I would offer, particularly because it was mentioned about once again the AU and hostilities upon neighbors. As Africa goes forward, Africa, might be in Africa's best interest to go forward as a continent, and not to go forward as individual countries, trying to evolve on their own. And with that, as I would offer that when you're constructing a new home or building or something, laying the foundation. What is the foundation? And foundation, more so for the U.S. than most places, foundation is an education. And so if what you have, vast education in the U.S. and education in the U.S. actually has exploded in the past several decades. I would say that there was a reference to the U.S. back in the 60s, and that's kind of when it maybe first came into multiracialism. Prior to that, we know segregation. Before that, we know about slavery, so on and so forth. But with that history, we have still all kind of grown up. And so now with the good news for the African American community is education. Places like Howard University and historically Black colleges and universities, it allows African Americans to be competitive. And so and the reason I offer that Africa do it as to the continentally to the extent possible, and that is so that you don't have, you know, uneven development. And so if you have like we had a white and a black evolution, with what, you know, with whites maybe having a 200-year advantage, and then kind of now in the last so many years with Martin Luther King and the civil rights movements and the transfer, and most recently President Obama. So again, that said, in Africa, you have an opportunity to lay a common foundation continent-wide. And that's where I would devote my interest and attentions to the people. And so, you know, the people will eventually come up with the ideas for other types of coming up with the new ideas and inventions and the things going forward. But absent people and absent strong people and strong communication, and both oral and written, you're still going to be left with leaders like Kagame and others who want to just stay there. So it starts at the early point, and then I think maybe we'll start to see results in subsequent generations. But lay the strong foundation with education.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Mende, are you there? Mende?
Yes.
Right, we want to have your
last,
you are the last person, yes. So want to have your closing remarks.
Well, thank you so much, and I have to appreciate the panel in terms of the level of respect and intellectualism that was brought, and I understand what Eric was meaning when he said we need to really debate these things in a very you know, historicized way and all that. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be at this particular panel, where we are able to really construct debate and be able to really understand how we can be able to better our societies through the lessons such as Rwanda and many of these African countries. So I sincerely thank the panel and yourself, the moderator. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Right, even though today is International Women's Day, we should have had a woman on. Yeah, we tried as much as possible to get Rahel, right, but we couldn't reach out to her. She was also busy traveling around the Great Lakes region. So we hope next time we might get a woman to join us. But on this note, we've come to the end of another Song for African series, and we hope that next week we'll be able to take a look at the elections, upcoming elections in South Sudan. So any of you are welcome to join us next week. On this note, we say goodbye and thank you to our listeners. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.